Imagine arriving in a strange land, your future husband nowhere to be found, and then being abandoned in the scorching desert with nothing but a suitcase and fading hope. For Eleanor Mitchell, this nightmare became reality in the summer of 1885. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from the shadows since her arrival, someone who would soon become her unlikely savior. This is the extraordinary tale of betrayal, survival, and an unexpected connection that would change two lives forever in the unforgiving Arizona territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled over the dusty trail, each jolt sending a wave of anxiety through Eleanor Mitchell's stomach. The vast, sun-baked landscape of the Arizona territory stretched endlessly outside the window, so different from the lush green fields of her home in Pennsylvania. At 23, Eleanor had made the most daring decision of her life, becoming a mail-order bride to a man she knew only through a handful of letters and a faded photograph. Her fingers nervously twisted the simple gold band she wore. Not yet a wedding ring, but a promise from her betrothed, Thomas Reynolds, a cattle rancher who had painted a picture of prosperity and companionship in his letters. The desperation of her situation back home had made his offer seem like salvation. After losing both parents to influenza and facing the prospect of becoming a burden to her already struggling relatives, Eleanor had answered an advertisement. In the matrimonial news, Thomas's letters had been kind, his promises generous, a home of her own, respect, and perhaps in time, affection. "First time out west, miss?" The grizzled driver's voice broke through her thoughts as he helped her down from the coach at Copper Springs, the nearest town to her future home. "Yes," Eleanor replied, smoothing down her travel-worn blue dress. "My fiancé is to meet me here, Mr. Thomas Reynolds." Something flickered across the driver's face. Surprise, perhaps concern, but it vanished quickly. "Reynolds, you say? Well, good luck to you, miss." The sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor waited on the wooden platform of the station. One by one, the other passengers were greeted by family or continued on their journeys. The station master locked up. Still, Thomas did not appear. "Miss, station's closing. You sure your party's coming today?" The station master asked, keys jangling in his hand. "There must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps he thought I was arriving tomorrow," Eleanor said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "You're welcome to wait at the hotel," he suggested, pointing to a two-story building across the dusty street. "Reynolds Ranch is a good 15 miles outside town. Not somewhere you'd want to venture alone, especially with night coming." The Copper Springs Hotel was modest, but clean. Eleanor paid for one night with precious coins from her dwindling savings, certain Thomas would arrive by morning. She sat by the window until darkness fell, watching every rider and wagon that passed, hoping each might be him. Morning came, and with it, new determination. Eleanor approached the hotel owner, a stout woman named Mrs. Winters, who frowned deeply at her inquiry about Thomas Reynolds. "Reynolds, are you certain that's who you're meeting, dear?" Mrs. Winters asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, we've been corresponding for months. I'm to be his wife," Eleanor said, presenting one of his letters as proof. Mrs. Winters exchanged glances with her husband behind the counter. "Perhaps you should speak with Sheriff Dawson before making any more plans." The sheriff's office was small, the man himself tall and weathered. He studied Thomas's letters with a deepening furrow in his brow. "Miss Mitchell, I'm afraid there's been some deception here," Sheriff Dawson said finally. "The man who wrote these letters isn't who you think. The real Thomas Reynolds was a rancher who died 2 years ago. His property was bought by a man named Victor Blackwood." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "That's impossible. I received a letter just 3 weeks ago." Someone's been using Reynolds' name, the sheriff explained, and it's not the first time. You're the third woman to arrive in the past year, each expecting to marry Thomas Reynolds. Eleanor gripped the edge of the desk. What happened to the others? The sheriff's expression darkened. They left town shortly after arriving, never heard from again. A cold dread settled in Eleanor's stomach. You think they met with foul play? I can't say for certain, but I'd strongly advise you to return east on the next coach. The next eastbound stage wouldn't depart for 5 days. With her funds rapidly depleting, Eleanor took a temporary position at Mrs. Winter's hotel, scrubbing floors and changing linens to pay for her room and board. On her 3rd day in Copper Springs, a man approached her as she swept the hotel porch, tall and expensively dressed, with cold eyes that didn't match his smile. "Miss Mitchell?" he inquired smoothly. "I believe you're looking for Thomas Reynolds. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm his business partner, James Harrington. Thomas has been delayed, but asked me to escort you to the ranch." Every instinct warned Eleanor to be wary. "That's strange. Sheriff Dawson informed me that Thomas Reynolds died 2 years ago." Harrington's smile didn't falter. "A different Thomas Reynolds, I assure you. Your betrothed is very much alive and eager to meet you. The sheriff is mistaken." "Then I'll wait until Mr. Reynolds comes for me himself," Eleanor replied firmly. Harrington's expression hardened momentarily before he regained his composure. "As you wish, but a woman alone in this town, it can be dangerous. Thomas would be most distressed if anything happened to his bride." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor retreated inside, her hands trembling. That evening, she confided in Mrs. Winters, who insisted Eleanor stay in her personal quarters that night rather than in her rented room. "James Harrington works for Victor Blackwood," Mrs. Winters explained in hushed tones. "Blackwood's a powerful man around these parts, owns half the mines and more land than anyone should, the kind of man who takes what he wants." "What could he possibly want with mail-order brides?" Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Winters shook her head grimly. "There are rumors about Blackwood's mines. Workers who are little more than slaves, people who disappear, women especially." Eleanor barely slept that night, her mind racing with plans for escape. The next day, she withdrew the last of her savings from her trunk, enough for a ticket home. If she could survive until the stagecoach arrived, later that afternoon, Mrs. Winters burst into the kitchen where Eleanor was working. "They're coming, Blackwood's men, 4 of them, including Harrington." She thrust a small bundle into Eleanor's hands. "Go out the back way. My son will take you to old Sam Morgan's place. He lives outside town, keeps to himself. You'll be safe there until the stage comes." "I can't put you in danger," Eleanor protested. "There's no time to argue," Mrs. Winters insisted. "These men, what they do to women, just go." Mrs. Winters' teenage son, Billy, waited by the back door with a horse. "Ride behind me," he instructed, "and keep your head down." They galloped away from town, taking a winding path through scrubland. To avoid being spotted from the main road, after nearly an hour, they approached a small, weather-beaten cabin nestled against rocky hills. "This is as far as I go," Billy said, helping Eleanor down. "Sam's not much for company, but he's a good man. Just tell him my ma sent you." Before Eleanor could thank him properly, he had turned his horse and was galloping back toward town. The cabin door opened before she reached it. A man stood in the shadows of the doorway, rifle in hand. He was perhaps 50, with a silver-streaked beard and eyes so pale blue they seemed almost colorless in his sun-darkened face. "What business you got here?" he demanded. "Mrs. Winters sent me," Eleanor replied, summoning all her courage. "She said you might shelter me until the stagecoach leaves for the east." The man studied her for a long moment. "You the mail-order bride?" "The one meant for Thomas Reynolds?" Eleanor nodded, surprised by his knowledge. "Been expecting someone might come," he said gruffly, stepping aside to let her enter. "Seems to be Blackwood's new scheme. Lure women out here, then make them disappear. The cabin's interior was spare, but meticulously clean. A single room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and a bookshelf surprisingly full of volumes lined one wall. "You can have the bed," Sam said. "I'll take the chair. Stage East leaves day after tomorrow. You can stay till then." That night, over a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Sam revealed he had once been the town doctor before retreating to this solitary existence. "Why did you leave town?" Eleanor asked. Sam's face hardened. "Crossed Blackwood. He wanted me to falsify death certificates for miners who died from his negligence. When I refused, my practice burned down." He paused. "Been watching him ever since, keeping notes on his operations. Someday, someone will bring him to justice." The next morning, Sam left early to hunt. Eleanor occupied herself by tidying the cabin and reading from his collection of books. Mid-afternoon, she stepped outside to gather water from the nearby spring. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when she saw the dust cloud approaching, 4 riders coming fast toward the cabin. Eleanor dropped the water bucket and ran back inside, bolting the door. She searched frantically for Sam's rifle, finding it mounted above the fireplace. Her hands trembled as she loaded it according to her father's long-ago instructions. The riders thundered into the clearing. James Harrington's voice called out, "Miss Mitchell, we know you're in there. Come out now, and no harm will come to you, or the old man when he returns." Eleanor positioned herself by the single window, rifle ready. "Leave now," she shouted. "The sheriff knows where I am." Harrington laughed. "The sheriff won't interfere in Mr. Blackwood's business. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." When they began to dismount, Eleanor fired a warning shot that sent dust kicking up near Harrington's feet. The men scrambled for cover. "The little bird has claws," one of them sneered. "Burn her out," Harrington ordered. One man approached with a torch, staying low and weaving to avoid giving Eleanor a clear shot. She fired again but missed. The torch flew through the window, landing on Sam's bed, which burst into flames. Smoke quickly filled the small cabin. Eleanor, coughing and desperate, knew she couldn't stay inside. Taking a deep breath, she kicked, opened the door and ran, firing wildly to keep the men at bay. She made it 30 yards before a lasso caught her ankles, sending her crashing to the ground. The rifle flew from her hands. Harrington stood over her, smiling coldly. "Mr. Blackwood will be very interested to meet such a spirited bride," he said, as his men bound her wrists. They forced her onto a horse, the cabin burning behind them. Eleanor's last hope died as she watched flames consume her brief sanctuary. Sam would return to find nothing but ashes, if he returned at all. Perhaps Blackwood's men had already found him. Instead of returning to town, they rode deeper into the wilderness, following trails that grew increasingly narrow and treacherous. By nightfall, they had entered a labyrinth of canyons and mesas. They made camp in a sheltered alcove, the men talking and laughing, as if they hadn't just kidnapped a woman and burned a man's home. Harrington approached where Eleanor sat, tied to a small tree. "You've caused considerable trouble, Miss Mitchell," he said, offering her water. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't appreciate complications." "What does he want with me?" Eleanor demanded. "Originally, just another worker for his operations. But now," Harrington smiled unpleasantly, "now he'll want to make an example of you. Can't have people thinking they can defy him." At dawn, they continued their journey, penetrating deeper into the harsh landscape. By midday, the heat had become unbearable. Eleanor, dehydrated and exhausted, struggled to remain conscious. Her fair skin, unaccustomed to the merciless sun, had burned painfully. They stopped at a small water hole. While the men watered their horses, Harrington untied Eleanor. "End of the line for you," he announced, throwing her suitcase, which they'd somehow retrieved from the hotel. Onto the ground beside her, Eleanor looked around in confusion. There was nothing but desert in all directions. "You're leaving me here? It's certain death." "That's the point," Harrington replied coldly. "Blackwood decided you're more trouble than you're worth. A shame, really. But your death will serve as a message to anyone else who might interfere with his business." "You won't get away with this," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "I already have." Harrington mounted his horse. "Goodbye, Miss Mitchell. I'd say it was a pleasure, but—" He shrugged, then led his men away, leaving Eleanor alone with her suitcase in the vast, unforgiving desert. The sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor watched her captors disappear into the distance. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to think. Water was her first priority. The men had drunk their fill, but perhaps the waterhole still held some moisture. She crawled to the muddy depression, finding just enough water to wet her parched lips and fill her small perfume bottle, which she emptied for this purpose. It wouldn't last long, but it was something. Opening her suitcase, Eleanor tore strips from her petticoat to wrap around her head for protection from the sun. She inventoried her meager possessions: a small sewing kit, a hand mirror, 2 dresses, undergarments, a book of poetry, and a locket containing her parents' miniature portraits. None of it would save her from dying of thirst or exposure. As the sun began its slow descent, Eleanor faced a terrible choice: stay by the waterhole in hopes that someone might pass by, or try to walk out of the desert before her strength failed completely. Looking around, she saw no landmarks, no signs of which direction might lead to salvation. With the last of the day's light fading, Eleanor sank to her knees. Her parents had raised her to believe in providence, but it seemed God had abandoned her in this desolate place. Tears wouldn't come, her body too dehydrated to spare the moisture. Instead, a strange calm descended over her. If this was to be her end, she would meet it with dignity. As darkness fell, the desert transformed. The oppressive heat gave way to a bone-deep chill. Stars emerged, countless and brilliant in the clear sky. Eleanor huddled against her suitcase, wrapping her arms around herself, wondering if she would survive until morning. She must have dozed off despite the cold, for she was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider materialized from the darkness, dismounting a few yards away. Fear shot through Eleanor. Had Harrington returned to finish what he'd started? But the figure that approached moved differently, cautiously. A match flared, illuminating a face she recognized with astonishment. Dr. Morgan. Sam knelt beside her, his pale eyes reflecting the starlight. "Thought I might find you out here," he said, offering her a canteen. "Drink slowly now." Eleanor took small sips of life-giving water. "How did you find me?" "Been tracking Blackwood's men for years," Sam explained. "I saw the smoke from my cabin, knew what had happened, followed their trail." He paused. "Truth is, I've been keeping an eye on you since you arrived in town." Eleanor stared at him in confusion. "Why would you watch me?" Sam's weathered face softened slightly. "Because you're the 4th mail-order bride to come looking for Thomas Reynolds in the past year. I couldn't save the others. Found out too late what Blackwood was doing, but with you, I had a chance to make things right. The others, they're dead," Eleanor whispered. Sam nodded grimly. "Blackwood's mine's terrible place. No one leaves alive." He stood, helping Eleanor to her feet. "But that's a story for another time. Right now we need to move. Harrington might change his mind, come back, to check you didn't survive." "Where will we go?" Eleanor asked, suddenly aware that she had nowhere and no one in this harsh land. "I have another place," Sam replied, securing her suitcase to his horse. "More remote than the cabin. Been my real home for years. The cabin was just a decoy of sorts for when I need to be closer to town." As Sam helped her onto his horse, Eleanor realized that in this strange man This doctor-turned-hermit who had been watching over her from the shadows, she had found an unexpected guardian. Whether that would be enough to survive what lay ahead remained to be seen, but for now she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for just moments ago. They rode through the night, the desert landscape transforming into a silver-painted dreamscape under the full moon. Eleanor, still weak from her ordeal, clung to Sam's back as the horse picked its way through narrow passes and dried creek beds that only someone intimately familiar with the terrain could navigate. "How much farther?" she whispered, her voice still raw from thirst, despite the water Sam had provided. "Nearly there," he replied. "Place isn't meant to be easy to find. That's kept me alive this long." As dawn broke, they approached a narrow canyon entrance barely visible among the towering red rocks. The passage twisted sharply several times before opening into a hidden valley that stunned Eleanor with its unexpected beauty. A small but vibrant oasis lay before them, a cluster of cottonwood trees surrounding a clear spring that fed patches of green grass and flowering desert plants. Nestled against the canyon wall stood a stone and adobe structure that blended so perfectly with the surrounding rocks that Eleanor hadn't noticed it at first glance. It was larger than the cabin that had burned, with a corral containing 2 horses beside it. "Welcome to what the local Apache call hidden water," Sam said, helping her down from the horse. "Been my true home for 8 years now." Inside, the dwelling was surprisingly comfortable. 2 rooms instead of 1, with a stone fireplace, handcrafted furniture, shelves lined with books and jars of medicinal herbs, and windows positioned to capture light without being visible from outside the canyon. "You've been hiding here all this time?" Eleanor asked, sinking gratefully onto a chair while Sam prepared tea from a kettle already hanging in the fireplace. "Not hiding, watching, learning, building a case against Blackwood," Sam corrected, his voice taking on an edge of obsession. He handed her a steaming mug. "This will help with the sunburn and exhaustion." As the aromatic tea revived her, Eleanor studied her rescuer. In the better light of his home, she could see that beneath the weather-beaten exterior and gruff manner lay the remnants of a once distinguished gentleman. His hands, though calloused, now still moved with a doctor's precision. "Why didn't you leave? Go somewhere else to practice medicine after Blackwood burned your practice?" she asked. Sam's expression darkened. He moved to a trunk in the corner, unlocking it with a key kept round his neck. From it he withdrew a leather portfolio bulging with papers. "Because of them," he said, opening the portfolio to reveal newspaper clippings, handwritten testimonies, crude maps, and lists of names. "The disappeared, the ones Blackwood destroyed, including my wife." Eleanor gasped softly. "Your wife?" Sam nodded, his pale eyes taking on a faraway look. "Catherine came west with me 15 years ago when I set up my practice in Copper Springs. She was a nurse, trained back east. We worked side by side." His voice grew strained. "Blackwood arrived 10 years ago, started buying up land, opening mines. Working conditions were brutal. Men died regularly, accidents, disease, exhaustion." He spread several documents across the table. "Catherine started treating miners secretly after Blackwood threatened us for documenting their injuries. One night, she didn't come home." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. 3 days later, they found her body in a ravine. Blackwood's sheriff ruled it an accident, claimed she'd been gathering herbs and fallen, but I knew. There were signs. She'd been questioned before being killed. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. After that, I made it my mission to gather evidence of everything Blackwood's done. Every person who's disappeared, every crooked deal, every bribed official." Sam gestured at the portfolio, including his latest scheme using Thomas Reynolds. Identity to lure women out here. What does he do with them? Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. His remote mines need workers, Sam replied grimly. Men are more likely to fight back or have people looking for them, but women alone, women who've traveled far from home to marry a man no one's ever met, they're perfect targets. No one comes looking. Eleanor shuddered. How many? 3 before. You that I know of, Sam said. Started about a year ago. First was Mary Cooper from Ohio, then Sarah Jensen from Illinois. 2 months ago, it was Rebecca Taylor from New York. All answering advertisements from Thomas Reynolds. All disappeared after reaching town. A chill ran through Eleanor, despite the warmth of the tea. And no one has reported this? Done anything stop it? Sam's laugh was bitter. Who would they report it to? The sheriff works for Blackwood. The territorial governor's office is 100 miles away, and rumor has it Blackwood has friends there too. The few who've tried to stand against him have ended up dead or driven out. Then what can we do? Eleanor asked. We, Sam repeated, studying her with newfound interest. You're still thinking of we after nearly dying because of Blackwood. Eleanor straightened, a spark of her natural determination returning. He lured me here under false pretenses, kidnapped me and left me to die. He's apparently done worse to other women. Should I simply try to forget and move on? A smile crossed Sam's face, the first she'd seen. You remind me of Catherine, same fire. He tapped the documents. I've been gathering evidence for years. Nearly have enough to take to the federal marshal in Tucson. One more piece of testimony, perhaps yours, could be what finally brings him down. But Blackwood thinks I'm dead, Eleanor realized. That gives us an advantage. It does, Sam agreed, for now, but we need to be cautious. Harrington and his men could return to check if you survived. That means staying here, out of sight. Over the next week, Eleanor recovered her strength. The canyon provided natural protection from both the elements and unwanted eyes. Sam showed her the hidden paths in and out, the places where food and supplies were stored, the clever system of cisterns that collected rainwater. She learned that Samuel Morgan had once been Dr. Samuel Morgan of Boston, graduate of Harvard Medical School, who had come west after losing his parents and siblings to typhoid. The West had offered a fresh start for him and Catherine, until Blackwood arrived. In turn, Eleanor shared her own story, her parents' deaths, the desperate circumstances that had led her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement, her dreams of a home and family of her own. Brave thing, coming all this way on nothing but a few letters and a photograph, Sam commented, as they sat outside one evening, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls. Foolish, you mean? Eleanor replied ruefully. Perhaps both, Sam said. Courage often looks like foolishness from certain angles. On the 10th day, Sam prepared to leave for a supply run to a small trading post run by a Navajo family he trusted. I normally go every 2 weeks, he explained, loading saddlebags onto his sturdier horse. We're running low on flour and coffee. Let me come with you, Eleanor suggested, eager to see more of the world beyond the canyon. Sam shook his head firmly. Too dangerous. Blackwood has eyes everywhere. But if he thinks I'm dead, he thinks you're dead in a specific part of the desert, Sam corrected. If you're spotted anywhere else, he'll know you survived, which means someone helped you. That puts a target on both our backs. He softened his tone. I'll only be gone overnight. Stay inside. Keep the door barred. If anyone comes, anyone at all, there's a hiding place beneath the floorboards under the rug. Use it. After Sam departed, the canyon's peaceful beauty took on an eerie quality. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a hawk made Eleanor a start. She kept busy organizing Sam's medical supplies, which had fallen into disarray over the years. By evening, she had created a proper dispensary on one shelf, each jar and packet neatly labeled. She was heating stew for dinner when she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. Eleanor immediately doused the lamps and the cooking fire, plunging the dwelling into darkness. Peering through a small gap in the shutters, she saw 3 riders entering the canyon, moving cautiously. With a surge of terror, she recognized James Harrington's tall figure in the lead. They had found Sam's sanctuary. Moving silently, Eleanor rolled back the rug and located the trapdoor Sam had described. It opened to reveal a small earthen chamber, stocked with water, preserved food, and even a small oil lamp. She slipped inside, pulling the trapdoor closed just as the sound of boots reached the front door. Muffled voices filtered down to her hiding place. "Place looks lived in," Harrington's unmistakable voice said. "Food still warm. Morgan's not alone out here." "You think it's the woman?" another man asked. "The one we left in the desert?" "If so, she's resilient," Harrington replied. "Blackwood will want to know how she survived. Should we wait for Morgan to return?" A pause. "No, Blackwood wants him brought in alive. Morgan's too clever to be taken easily. We'll get reinforcements and return tomorrow at dawn. He'll never expect a force." "That size?" The men departed, leaving Eleanor trembling in her hiding place. Sam would ride straight into an ambush if she didn't warn him. But how? She had no idea where the trading post was located, and venturing into the desert alone had nearly killed her once already. Yet staying meant certain capture for both of them. After an hour, when she was certain the men were truly gone, Eleanor emerged from her hiding place. Moving quickly, she packed a small bag with water, dried meat, and the medicinal herbs she might need. She changed into the sturdiest clothes from her suitcase, a plain brown dress with a matching jacket. Outside, the moon provided enough light to see by. Sam had taught her how to saddle and bridle the remaining horse, a gentle mare named Willow. "I'm sorry, old girl," Eleanor whispered as she led the horse from the corral. "We have a long night ahead." She had only the vaguest idea of which direction Sam had taken, but she remembered him pointing northeast when describing the trading post. With a silent prayer, Eleanor mounted and guided the horse toward the canyon entrance. The desert, at night, was a different world, eerily beautiful, but filled with unseen dangers. Eleanor kept Willow at a steady pace, constantly scanning for any sign of Harrington's men or, hopefully, Sam's trail. Hours passed. The moon began its descent. Doubt crept in. Was she riding in entirely the wrong direction? Near dawn, as the eastern sky lightened to pearl, she caught sight of movement in the distance, a lone rider coming toward her. Heart pounding, Eleanor guided Willow behind a large boulder, watching anxiously as the figure approached. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Sam's weathered hat and the distinctive gait of his horse. She urged Willow forward, waving frantically. Sam pulled up sharply, his rifle half raised before he recognized her. "Eleanor, what in God's name?" "Harrington found the canyon," she blurted out. "3 men. They're bringing reinforcements at dawn. They know you're not alone." Sam's expression hardened. "How long ago?" "Hours. I left as soon as they were gone." He nodded grimly. "You did the right, but we can't go back." "Where will we go?" Sam was silent for a moment, calculating. "We've run out of time for caution. The federal marshal is our only hope now." He gestured for her to follow. "There's a place where we can rest for a few hours. Then we ride to Tucson." They made camp in a sheltered arroyo, taking turns keeping watch. As they prepared to leave, Sam handed Eleanor his spare revolver. "Ever fired one of these?" She accepted it, feeling its weight. "My father taught me, though it's been years." "Let's hope you remember," Sam said. "The route to Tucson takes us closer to Blackwood's territory than I'd like." The journey was grueling. They traveled primarily at night to avoid Blackwood's patrols, resting during the hottest hours in whatever shade they could find. Eleanor's Newfound skills at recognizing desert plants that stored water proved invaluable when their canteens ran low. On the third day, they encountered a small group of Apache who knew Sam by the name Medicine Man of Hidden Water. The tribal elder, a woman whose face was a map of deep wrinkles, studied Eleanor intently before speaking to Sam in her language. "She says Blackwood's men are searching everywhere for us," Sam translated. 20 riders at least. The Apache offered them shelter, but Sam declined. "Too dangerous for them," he explained to Eleanor as they rode away. "Blackwood has been trying to drive them from these lands for years. If he found us with them, they were less than a day's ride from Tucson when disaster struck. As they navigated a narrow pass between towering mesas, shots rang out, echoing against the rock walls. Sam's horse reared, throwing him to the ground as a bullet grazed its flank. Eleanor dismounted quickly, dragging Sam behind a boulder as more shots kicked up dust around them. Blood stained his left sleeve where a bullet had found its mark. "How bad?" she asked, already tearing strips from her petticoat to bind the wound. "Clean through," Sam winced. "But we're trapped." Harrington's voice called from above. "Dr. Morgan, Miss Mitchell, there's nowhere to run. Surrender now, and Mr. Blackwood might be merciful." Sam met Eleanor's eyes. "The saddlebags on my horse. The evidence is there. If anything happens to me, you need to get it to Marshal Linden in Tucson." "Nothing's happening to you," Eleanor insisted, tightening the makeshift bandage around his arm. More shots peppered their position. There were at least 5 shooters based on the different firing positions. Their frightened horses had bolted, though thankfully not in the direction of their attackers. "We need a distraction," Sam muttered, checking his revolver. Only 4 bullets remained. Eleanor peered around the boulder, taking in their surroundings. The pass narrowed just ahead, with a steep scree slope to one side. An idea formed. "Cover me," she said suddenly. Before Sam could protest, she darted toward a pile of loose rocks, keeping low. A shot kicked up dust near her feet, but she reached the spot safely. Using a fallen branch as a lever, she dislodged one large boulder, then another. They careened down the slope, gathering more rocks as they fell, creating a small avalanche that sent their attackers scrambling for cover. In the ensuing confusion, Eleanor raced back to Sam. Now, while they're distracted, together they made their way through the narrowest part of the pass and down the other side, where the terrain opened to provide more cover. A quarter-mile ahead, they spotted Eleanor's mare, Willow, who had stopped to graze on a patch of desert grass. "Clever girl," Eleanor breathed, approaching slowly so as not to startle the horse. "One horse won't carry us both far or fast," Sam said, his face pale from blood loss. "You need to go on alone." "I'm not leaving you," Eleanor insisted. "You must," Sam replied firmly. "The evidence against Blackwood is what matters. All those lives, Catherine's life, the other bride's, none of it means anything if Blackwood goes." "Free." Eleanor recognized the truth in his words, but still she hesitated. "Where will you go?" "There's an old silver mine shaft about 2 miles south. Been abandoned for years. I can hide there until you return with help." He pressed a folded paper into her hand. "Map to find it, and this." He removed the key from around his neck. "For the marshal. It opens a strongbox in my saddlebag. Additional. Evidence too valuable to risk carrying openly." The sound of pursuit grew louder. "Go!" Sam urged, "while you still can." Fighting back tears, Eleanor mounted Willow. "I'll bring help, I promise." "I know you will," Sam replied, his pale blue eyes holding hers for a long moment. Then he turned and limped toward the south, disappearing among the rocks. Eleanor rode hard for Tucson, pushing Willow to her limits. The sun beat down mercilessly, but she dared not stop. Images of Sam, wounded and alone, drove her forward, along with thoughts of the other women who had come before her. Mary, Sarah, Rebecca, whose fates now rested in her hands. By nightfall, the lights of Tucson glimmered in the distance. Civilization, safety, justice, perhaps. But as she approached the outskirts of town, 3 riders appeared suddenly, blocking her path. Harrington sat atop his black stallion, flanked by 2 gunmen. "Miss Mitchell," he called, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. "You've led us on quite a chase. Mr. Blackwood is most anxious to speak with you." Eleanor reached for Sam's revolver, concealed in the folds of her skirt. Before she could draw it, one of the gunmen fired. The bullet whizzed past her ear, a warning shot. "Now, now!" Harrington chided. "No need for heroics. Dr. Morgan is already in Mr. Blackwood's custody." Ice formed in Eleanor's veins. "You're lying." "Am I?" Harrington reached into his coat and removed a familiar object, the silver watch that Sam always carried. "Catherine's. Gift to him," he'd explained. Eleanor recognized the distinctive engraving on its case. "You see, we've had men watching the approach to Tucson for days," Harrington continued. "While you were busy playing the hero, others were tracking Dr. Morgan. He's being transported to Blackwood's mine as we speak." Eleanor's hope crumbled. Sam was captured. The evidence against Blackwood is nearly within reach of the authorities, yet now in danger of being lost forever. Harrington extended his hand. "The key, Miss Mitchell, and the saddlebag." Eleanor gripped the reins tighter, mind racing. Tucson lay just ahead. If she could somehow reach Marshal Linden— "Don't even think about it," Harrington warned, as if reading her thoughts. "You'll never make it. And even if you did, who would believe a desperate mail-order bride with a wild tale about a powerful businessman? Especially when there's no evidence to support your claims." Clutching Sam's key beneath her dress, Eleanor raised her chin defiantly. The road to Tucson stretched before her, so tantalizingly close. Beyond Harrington and his men lay her one chance. For justice, not just for herself, but for Sam, for Catherine, for all of Blackwood's victims. Her hand inched toward the revolver hidden in her skirt. 4 bullets, 3 men, and the fate of countless lives hanging in the balance. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor weighed her options. The revolver pressed against her thigh, a cold reminder of the choice before her. 3 men, 4 bullets. The odds weren't in her favor, especially against experienced gunmen. "I'm growing impatient, Miss Mitchell," Harrington called, his hand moving toward his own weapon. At that moment, Eleanor made her decision. Not with gunfire, but with something. Far more powerful: deception. "The evidence isn't with me," she called back, letting her shoulders slump in apparent defeat. "Dr. Morgan hid it before we separated. I'm to meet the marshal, then take him to its location." Doubt flickered across Harrington's face. "You expect me to believe that?" "Why would I carry incriminating documents right into a town where Blackwood might have spies?" Eleanor countered. Dr. Morgan was too cautious for that. Harrington studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing her words. "Where is it hidden?" "I'll only reveal that to Marshal Linden," Eleanor replied firmly. "Then you're of no use to us," one of the gunmen growled, raising his pistol. "Wait!" Harrington ordered sharply. A calculating smile spread across his face. "Perhaps we can accommodate each other, Miss Mitchell. You clearly care what happens to Dr. Morgan. His life for the location of the evidence. How do I know he's still alive?" Eleanor demanded. "You don't," Harrington admitted. "But I give you my word he will remain so, if you cooperate." Eleanor allowed a flicker of uncertainty to cross her face, playing her role. "I need to think." "Think quickly," Harrington advised. "My men are not known for their patience." Eleanor made a show of deliberating, all while subtly shifting Willow's position to create a clearer path toward town. "If I tell you where the evidence is hidden, you'll release Dr. Morgan? Once we verify your information is accurate?" "Yes." Harrington lied smoothly. Eleanor glanced toward Tucson, then back at Harrington, letting him believe she was wavering. "The evidence is hidden." Before finishing her sentence, she dug her heels into Willow's sides and yanked the reins hard, too. The right, away from the road. The mare leapt forward, startled by the sudden command. Gunshots rang out behind her, but Eleanor was already racing across the open desert, taking advantage of the darkness and her lighter weight to outpace her pursuers. She heard Harrington shouting commands, horses thundering after her. But Willow, despite her exhaustion, responded valiantly to Eleanor's urgency. They tore across the sand, weaving between cacti and boulders that formed natural obstacles for the heavier horses behind them. Eleanor had no illusions about outrunning Blackwood's men indefinitely. Her only hope was to reach Tucson by a different route. Sam had mentioned a creek bed that led into the eastern edge of town, a route rarely used since the creek had dried up years ago. Guided by the stars and her limited knowledge of the area, Eleanor steered Willow toward what she hoped was the right direction. The sound of pursuit gradually faded as her gamble paid off. Harrington and his men had continued along the main road, expecting her to head directly for town. The dried creek bed appeared as a silvery ribbon in the moonlight. Eleanor guided Willow down its steep bank, the mare's hooves sliding on loose stones. Once in the shelter of the ravine, they moved more cautiously, navigating around fallen branches and rock piles that could injure the horse in the dim light. After what seemed an eternity, the creek bed widened, and Eleanor could see, scattered lights ahead, the eastern outskirts of Tucson. She emerged cautiously, scanning for any sign of Harrington's men. The streets were mostly deserted at this late hour, with only a few lamps burning in windows. A weathered sign pointed toward the town center. Eleanor steered Willow at a walk now, trying not to attract attention. The poor mare was trembling with exhaustion, foam flecking her neck. "Just a little farther, brave girl," Eleanor whispered encouragingly. The marshal's office stood on the main street, a solid adobe building with the territorial flag hanging beside its door. No light shone from within. Eleanor dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting after the long ride. She secured Willow to a hitching post and approached the door, knocking firmly. No answer came. Panic began to rise in her chest. What if the marshal was away? What if Blackwood's influence had reached even here? A voice spoke from the shadows beside the building. "Office is closed. Marshal Linden won't be back until morning." Eleanor spun around to face a deputy, young and clearly tired, leaning against the wall. "This can't wait until morning," she insisted. "Lives are at stake. Where can I find him?" The deputy regarded her skeptically, taking in her disheveled appearance and dust-covered clothes. "Ma'am, whatever your trouble is—" "It concerns Victor Blackwood," Eleanor interrupted. "And evidence of his crimes." The deputy's expression changed instantly. "Blackwood?" He glanced nervously up and down the street. "Come with me, quickly." He led her to a modest house 3 blocks away, where light still glowed from the windows. Despite the late hour, an older man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face opened the door, a book in one hand. "Jenkins? What's this about?" he asked, eyeing Eleanor with curiosity. "She mentioned Blackwood, sir. Said something about evidence." "Marshal." Linden's gaze sharpened. "You'd better come in, miss." Once inside, Eleanor poured out her story, the deceptive letters from Thomas Reynolds, her near death in the desert, Sam's rescue and his years of gathering evidence, and finally, his capture and the danger he now faced. Throughout her account, the marshal listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions. When she finished, she handed him Sam's key and the map to the abandoned mine where Sam had planned to hide. "Dr. Morgan said this key opens a strongbox in his saddlebag," she explained. "The saddlebag was on his horse when we were ambushed." "And you believe Blackwood's men have captured both Dr. Morgan and this saddlebag?" Linden asked gravely. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, "but they may not know the significance of the strongbox yet." "There's still time to act." The marshal exchanged glances with his deputy. "Jenkins, rouse the men, all of them, and send word to Fort Grant. We'll need military support for this." "You believe me?" Eleanor asked, surprised by his immediate acceptance of her story. Linden's expression was grim. Miss Mitchell, I've been building a case against Blackwood for years. Several witnesses have mysteriously disappeared before they could testify. Dr. Morgan's evidence could be what we've been waiting for. Hope surged within Eleanor. Then you'll help rescue him? We'll do more than that, Lyndon promised. If what you've told me is true, we'll bring down Blackwood's entire operation. By dawn, the marshal had assembled a force of 12 deputies and 20 soldiers from the nearby fort. Eleanor, despite her exhaustion, insisted on accompanying them. You've done enough, Miss Mitchell, Lyndon argued. This will be dangerous. Dr. Morgan saved my life, Eleanor replied firmly. I won't abandon him now. Recognizing her determination, Lyndon reluctantly agreed, though he insisted she remain with the rear guard. Maps were spread out, strategy discussed. Blackwood's main mining operation lay in a box canyon 30 miles northwest of Tucson. The likely destination for Sam if Harrington believed he still needed information from him. Blackwood maintains armed guards at the canyon entrance, Lyndon explained to his men. Once inside, there's only one way out. We'll need to move quickly and decisively. The force departed as the sun rose, traveling swiftly across terrain that had become familiar to Eleanor over the past days. Despite her weariness, determination kept her alert, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Midday, they encountered an Apache scout who confirmed seeing riders matching Harrington's description heading toward Blackwood's mine. The scout also reported that a prisoner, a wounded older white man, was indeed with them. He lives, Eleanor breathed, relief washing over her. As they approached the canyon, Lyndon ordered his men to dismount and advance on foot. Eleanor remained with the horses as agreed, watching anxiously as the forces split to surround the canyon entrance. The first shots rang out minutes later, followed by shouted commands and the thunder of more gunfire. Smoke rose above the canyon rim. Unable to bear the suspense, Eleanor crept forward until she could see the battle unfolding. Blackwood's guards, caught by surprise, were quickly overwhelmed. The marshal's forces pushed into the canyon, meeting stronger resistance as they approached. The mine entrance, a dark hole in the mountainside, surrounded by rough wooden structures. From her vantage point, Eleanor spotted movement on a ridge above the mine. A man in a familiar black coat, leading a horse up a narrow trail. Harrington, attempting to escape the siege, and tied across his saddle was what appeared to be a body. Without thinking, Eleanor rushed back to the horses, mounted a fresh one provided by the soldiers, and set off along a parallel ridge. If she could circle around, she might cut off Harrington's escape route. The trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for a horse in some places. Eleanor leaned forward, urging her mount upward, keeping Harrington in sight whenever the path allowed. He hadn't noticed her pursuit, his attention focused on navigating the difficult terrain while battle raged below. At the canyon's upper end, the two trails converged. Eleanor reached the junction first and dismounted, positioning herself behind, a boulder with Sam's revolver in hand. Moments later, Harrington appeared, his horse laboring under its double burden. "Stop right there, Harrington," Eleanor called, stepping into view with the revolver aimed steadily. Harrington reined his horse sharply, his face registering surprise before settling into a mocking smile. "Miss Mitchell, you are remarkably persistent." "Untie Dr. Morgan," she commanded. "Now." "And if I refuse?" Harrington challenged, though he made no move toward his own weapon. "Then I'll shoot you where you stand," Eleanor replied calmly. "I believe I mentioned my father taught me to shoot." Skepticism flashed across Harrington's face. "You don't have it in you to kill a man." In answer, Eleanor adjusted her aim and fired. The bullet struck the ground inches from Harrington's boot. His horse shied nervously. "The next one won't miss," she promised. "Dr. Morgan, now!" With obvious reluctance, Harrington reached back to untie the ropes securing Sam to the saddle. As he worked, Eleanor noticed his eyes darting to something beyond her. She pivoted just in time to see another rider cresting the ridge behind her, one of Blackwood's men, rifle raised. She dropped to one knee and fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed, but the second found its mark. The gunman tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. The distraction was all Harrington needed. He drew his own weapon and fired at Eleanor, the bullet grazing her arm. Searing pain lanced through her, but she maintained her grip on the revolver, returning fire with her last bullet. Jonathan was Abigail's son, a solemn 4-year-old who had been staying with the Morgans since his mother's condition worsened. With no father and no other family nearby, his future remained uncertain. "You know Mary will take good care of him," Eleanor said gently, referring to Abigail's sister. "She would," Abigail agreed, "but Jonathan has never met her, and California is so far—" She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I've seen how he is with you and Dr. Morgan, how you are with him." Eleanor held her breath, sensing what might be coming. "I know it's asking a great deal," Abigail continued, "but I would die easier knowing he was with people who already love him, people he trusts." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "You want us to raise Jonathan?" Abigail nodded weakly. "I've watched you with him these past months. The way your eyes follow him, the stories you read about him each night. He adores you both." A weak smile crossed her face. "And I think perhaps you need him as much as he needs you." That evening, after Abigail had drifted to sleep, Eleanor sat with Sam in their garden, Rebecca's letter forgotten as they discussed Abigail's request. "It's a tremendous responsibility," Sam said carefully, "raising another woman's child." "Is that your only concern?" Eleanor asked. "That he isn't ours by blood." Sam's expression softened. "You know that, isn't it? Jonathan is a fine boy. I've grown fond of him myself." He took her hand. "I'm more concerned about you. If we take him in, and then—" He hesitated. "And then I finally conceive." Eleanor finished for him. "Sam, we've been married for 5 years. The doctor in Phoenix said it might never happen for us." Her voice caught. "Jonathan needs a family. We have love to give. Isn't that what matters?" In the gentle twilight, with desert blooms releasing, their fragrance around them, Sam drew her close. "Yes," he murmured against her hair, "that's exactly what matters." 3 weeks later, they buried Abigail in the town cemetery. Jonathan stood between them, his small hand clutching Eleanor's as the preacher spoke words of comfort. The boy didn't cry. He had done his weeping in private, curled against Eleanor's shoulder the night his mother had finally slipped away. Life gradually established a new pattern. Jonathan began attending the local school, returning each afternoon full of stories and questions. Eleanor adjusted the clinic hours to ensure she was home when he arrived. Sam taught him to ride, to identify plants, to tie knots, and to treat animals, starting him on the path of healing that had defined both their lives. Their family grew in unexpected ways. Sarah Jensen, another of the rescued mail-order brides, moved back to Tucson after a teaching position in Phoenix ended abruptly. She took a room in town, but spent most evenings with the Morgans, becoming something of an aunt to Jonathan and a sister to Eleanor. "You've built something remarkable here," Sarah commented one Sunday afternoon, as they watched Sam teaching Jonathan how to set a splint on his wooden toy horse. A clinic, a home, a family, from such unlikely beginnings. Eleanor smiled, recalling her terrifying arrival in the territory and subsequent abandonment in the desert. "Life rarely follows the path we expect." "Speaking of unexpected paths," Sarah said, lowering her voice, "there's talk in town about Blackwood." Eleanor tensed. Victor Blackwood had been sentenced to hang for his crimes, but legal maneuvers and appeals had dragged on for years. The last she had heard, he was still imprisoned in Yuma Territorial Prison, awaiting execution. "What about him?" she asked warily. "Rumor has it he's dying. Consumption, ironically, the same disease that took Abigail. A complex mixture of emotions washed through Eleanor. Satisfaction that Blackwood was suffering, guilt for feeling that, satisfaction, and a lingering fear that had never completely disappeared. "They say he's been asking for Dr. Morgan," Sarah continued, "requesting him specifically. The prison physician can't do anything more for him." Eleanor's grip tightened on her teacup. "Sam hasn't mentioned anything. Perhaps he doesn't know yet. Or perhaps—" Sarah hesitated. "Perhaps he didn't want to upset you." That night, after Jonathan was asleep, Eleanor confronted Sam in his study. "Were you going to tell me about Blackwood's request?" Sam looked up from his medical journal, surprise evident on his face. "How did you hear about that, Sarah? Apparently it's common knowledge in town." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Why keep it from me?" Sam sighed, removing his reading glasses. "Because I have no intention of going. The man is responsible for Catherine's death, for your suffering, for what happened to those women. Why would I ease his passing?" Eleanor sat beside him, studying the face she had come to know so intimately. "Because you're a healer. It's who you are." "Some men don't deserve healing," Sam replied, an unusual hardness in his voice. "Perhaps it's not about what he deserves," Eleanor suggested quietly, "but about who we choose to be." The following morning, a formal letter arrived from the warden of Yuma Territorial Prison, officially requesting Dr. Samuel Morgan's medical services for prisoner Victor Blackwood. The warden offered a substantial payment and guaranteed safe passage. Sam placed the letter on the breakfast table between them. Jonathan had already left for school, leaving them alone with the decision. "If you go," Eleanor said slowly, "I'm coming with you." Sam looked up sharply. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Blackwood is dying and heavily guarded," she countered, "and I'm not the same frightened mail-order bride who stepped off that stagecoach 5 years ago." Her chin lifted with quiet determination. "Besides, Jonathan will be safe with Sarah for a few days. Eleanor, we face this together," she interrupted firmly, "as we have everything else." The journey to Yuma took 3 days by train, a luxury that hadn't existed when Eleanor first came west. The landscape outside their window transformed from the scrubland around Tucson to ever more desolate terrain. Yuma Prison rose from the desert like a medieval fortress, its granite walls baking under the relentless sun. Warden Michael Davis greeted them personally, a tall man with military bearing and shrewd eyes. "Dr. and Mrs. Morgan, thank you for coming on such short notice." "I've made no promises about treatment," Sam clarified immediately. "I'll examine the prisoner, but I won't guarantee more." The warden nodded. "Understood. Though I should warn you, Blackwood insists he has information that you'll want. He refuses to share it with anyone else." Eleanor and Sam exchanged glances. What could Blackwood possibly know that would interest them after all this time? They were led through a series of heavy doors and barred gates, descending into the infirmary, level where the air hung hot and stagnant. Guards stood at attention outside a private cell, stepping aside as the warden approached. "Prisoner is restrained, but stay behind the line on the floor," Davis instructed. "He receives no special privileges despite his condition." The cell door opened to reveal a shadow of the man who had once terrorized the territory. Victor Blackwood, once powerful and imposing, had been reduced to a gaunt figure shackled to a hospital bed. His skin had a greyish pallor, and each breath wheezed painfully from his lungs, yet his eyes, cold and calculating, remained unchanged. They fixed on Eleanor immediately, a thin smile stretching across his face. "The mail-order bride," he rasped. "And her doctor, how domestic." Sam stepped forward, medical bag in hand. I'm here to examine you, Blackwood. Nothing more. Blackwood coughed, the sound wet and ominous. Examination won't help me, Doctor. We both know I'm finished. His gaze slid back to Eleanor. But before I go, I thought you might want something that belongs to you. Eleanor's spine stiffened. You have nothing that belongs to me, don't I? Another smile, this one almost triumphant despite his condition. Harrington kept meticulous records, including the names and destinations of all our employees. We freed your prisoners years ago, Sam said dismissively. If that's all? Blackwood interrupted, laughing until the laugh transformed into another coughing spasm. No, Doctor, not all. Tell me, did you ever wonder about the other women? A chill ran through Eleanor. What other women? Harrington was efficient. Blackwood continued, clearly relishing their attention despite his suffering. When a bride arrived asking for Thomas Reynolds, he assessed her potential value. The strongest became workers in the most remote mines, but the others, the weaker ones, the less useful, they were sold. Sold? Eleanor whispered, horror dawning. To operations in Mexico, mostly. Mining companies are even more desperate for workers than mine. Brothels, in some cases. He shrugged as if discussing a mundane business transaction. Waste not, want not. Sam's face had gone rigid with fury. You're lying, am I? Blackwood nodded toward a battered ledger on the small table beside his bed. See for yourself. Names, dates, destinations. 17 women in all, over 3 years. Some might still be alive with the right intervention, though after 5 years he let the implication hang in the air. Eleanor felt the room spin slightly. 17 women, beyond the 3 they had rescued, 17 lives destroyed by the same deception that had nearly claimed her own. Why tell us this now? She demanded, finding her voice. Blackwood's eyes gleamed with malice, even as death shadowed his face. Consider it my legacy. I may die in this cell, but I leave knowing my work outlived me. That while you played house and healed the sick, women suffered because you never looked beyond your own rescue. Sam took a threatening step forward before catching himself. You sadistic bastard. Perhaps, Blackwood admitted, but an honest one at the end. The ledger is yours, Doctor. My final gift. What you do with it, another racking cough bent him double, is your burden now. The warden ended the visit shortly after, having heard enough to warrant a new investigation. The ledger was officially confiscated as evidence, though they were promised copies of all its information. Eleanor and Sam sat in silence in their hotel room that evening, the weight of Blackwood's revelation pressing down on them. Outside, the sun set over the Colorado River, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that neither of them noticed. He could have been lying, Sam said finally, one last attempt to inflict pain. The warden didn't think so, Eleanor replied. Nor did you, really. Sam scrubbed a hand over his face. No. The details were too specific. He looked at her with troubled eyes. What do we do with this, Eleanor? It was a genuine question, one husband to wife, one partner to another. In the years of their marriage, he had come to value her judgment as equal to his own, her moral compass as true as any. He'd known. Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. If there's even a chance that some of those women are alive, still suffering, she turned back to him. We have to try to find them, to bring them home. It could take months, Sam warned. Years, even. We'd have to travel into Mexico, navigate a foreign legal system, deal with dangerous mining operations. I know. Eleanor's mind turned to Jonathan, to their clinic, to the life they had built. But how can we return to that life, knowing what we know now? How can we look Jonathan in the eye and teach him about doing what's right if we walk away? From this, Sam crossed to her, taking her hands in his. It won't be like before. We're not just two people with nothing to lose. We have responsibilities, a child who needs us. Which is exactly why we must do this, Eleanor insisted. For Jonathan's future, for the world he'll grow up in. Her voice softened. Sam, you watched over me when I was a stranger because it was the right thing to do. How can we do any less for these women? The resolve in her eyes reminded Sam of why he had fallen in love with this extraordinary woman. Her courage, her compassion, her unwavering moral certainty. He had once thought he was saving her, only to discover she was his salvation. We'll need help, he said finally. Marshal Linden, perhaps, and Sarah to look after Jonathan. Eleanor's face brightened with hope. Rebecca's husband has contacts in the Mexican government, and Mary's back in Ohio now, but she mentioned her brother works for a newspaper. Public pressure could help. As they began to plan, a sense of purpose filled the room, not erasing the horror of what they had learned, but transforming it into something actionable, something they could fight. 3 days later, they returned to Tucson with copies of Blackwood's ledger and a determination that would reshape their lives once again. Victor Blackwood died the following week, taking his final breath, knowing he had disrupted their peace, his last act of malice. Yet what he had intended as a poisoned legacy became instead a catalyst for something he could never have imagined. A movement that would ultimately lead to the rescue of not just the women in his ledger, but dozens of others trapped in similar circumstances across the borderlands. Eleanor stood on their porch the evening before their planned departure for Mexico, watching Jonathan help Sam load the wagon with medical supplies and provisions. A boy had accepted their temporary absence with solemn understanding beyond his years. "You're going to help ladies like my mama's friends," he had said, when they explained as much as was appropriate for his young ears. "The ones who got lost." "That's right," Eleanor had confirmed, marveling at his intuitive grasp of their mission. "And while we're gone, you'll help Aunt Sarah run the school and learn all you can." Now, as twilight painted the desert in shades of amber and mauve, Eleanor felt a strange sense of completion. The frightened young woman who had arrived in this harsh land seeking a husband had found instead a purpose, a family formed not by blood, but by choice, and a calling that transcended her own comfort. Sam joined her on the porch, his arm slipping around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" "No," she replied honestly, "just reflecting on how far we've come, and how far we still have to go." He nodded, understanding as always. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from the man who had watched over her from the shadows, and then stepped into the light to become her partner in all things. "Together," she agreed, "always." In the gathering dusk, they stood united, no longer just rescuers and rescued, but two souls forged in adversity, bound by love, and committed to extending to others the second chance they had found in each other's arms. The Mexican border town of Nogales simmered under the midday sun as Eleanor and Sam dismounted in front of the customs office. 6 weeks had passed since their visit to Blackwood's deathbed, weeks spent securing letters of introduction, arranging contacts, and preparing for what might be their most challenging journey yet. Marshal Linden had accompanied them to the border, using his authority to smooth their passage. "I've sent telegrams ahead to my counterpart in Hermosillo," he explained as they presented their papers. "Captain Ortega is expecting you." Eleanor studied the bustling marketplace beyond the customs building, where vendors called out their wares in rapid Spanish and horse-drawn carts navigated narrow streets. Despite her years in the Arizona territory, this was her first time crossing into Mexico, and the subtle differences, the architecture, the language, the very rhythm of life, both intrigued and unsettled her. "Remember," Linden cautioned as their papers were stamped, "you're here officially as medical missionaries." Nothing about investigations or rescues until you connect with Ortega. Blackwood had powerful friends on both sides of the border. Sam nodded grimly. We understand the risks. And we accept them, Eleanor added, adjusting the medical bag slung across her shoulder. Years of working alongside Sam had transformed her from assistant to skilled practitioner in her own right, knowledge that would serve their cover story well. Lyndon clasped their hands in farewell. I'll await your telegram in a week. If I don't hear from you... He didn't finish the thought, but the implication was clear. He would come looking for them. Their first destination was Hermosillo, the capital of Sonora State, where Captain Ortega of the Rurales, Mexico's federal police force, had agreed to meet them. The stagecoach journey took 2 days through increasingly rugged terrain, the landscape shifting from desert flats to mountain passes where bandits were known to lurk. You're very quiet, Sam observed as they jolted along a particularly rough stretch of road. Eleanor turned from the window. I'm thinking about Jonathan, wondering if we did the right thing, leaving him. Sarah will take good care of him, Sam assured her. And this journey, it's for him too. The world we're trying to build. I know. Eleanor sighed. It's just... The last letter in Blackwood's ledger was dated only 6 months before his arrest. If some of those women are still alive... Sam took her hand. Then we'll find them, one by one if necessary. Captain Diego Ortega proved to be younger than they had expected, a trim, mustached man in his 30s with intelligent eyes and a formal manner. He received them in his modest office, examining Blackwood's ledger with growing concern. These locations, he said in lightly accented English, pointing to notations in the margins. Many are in remote mining regions controlled by powerful companies. Some are in territories where even the Rurales have limited authority. But you can help us reach them, Eleanor pressed. Ortega hesitated. Senora Morgan, I admire your mission, truly. But you must understand, these companies operate almost as independent states. They have their own security forces, their own rules. He leaned forward. And if these women were indeed sold, as your Mr. Blackwood claimed, those who purchased them will not simply hand them over. We're prepared for difficulty, Sam stated. Are you prepared for danger? Ortega countered. For violence. The mining operations in the Sierra Madre are not gentle places. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Captain, I was once left to die in the desert by Victor Blackwood's men. I survived that and much else since. We did not come all this way to be deterred by warnings. Something in her quiet determination seemed to impress the captain. After a moment, he nodded. Very well, I will escort you to the first location myself. A silver mine near Alamos. According to this ledger, a woman named Harriet Collins was sold there 3 years ago. Their journey into Mexico's interior began the following day. Captain Ortega provided horses and supplies, along with 2 trusted rurales as additional escorts. The terrain grew increasingly mountainous as they traveled south, the vegetation changing from desert scrub to patches of oak and pine forest at higher elevations. Ortega proved a knowledgeable guide, explaining the complex politics of the region and the sometimes tenuous relationship between remote communities and the central government. President Diaz promotes progress and foreign investment, he explained one evening around their campfire, but progress has its costs, especially for those with no power. On the 4th day, they created a ridge to see the mining town of Santa Elena spread below them, a cluster of buildings dominated by the processing facilities of the Sierra Plata Mining Company. Smoke belched from tall stacks, and they could hear the distant clang of machinery even from their elevated position. American-owned, Ortega noted, but they employ local administrators to manage the operation. He pointed to a walled compound on the hillside above the main works. That's where the administrators and engineers live. Below are the workers' quarters. And somewhere in between, hopefully, Is Harriet Collins, Eleanor murmured. Their arrival in town created immediate interest. Foreign visitors were rare, and the presence of rurales even more unusual. They took rooms at the town's only inn, a dusty establishment that catered primarily to merchants and engineers visiting the mine. "I will make our official inquiries tomorrow," Ortega advised. "As medical missionaries, you are free to offer your services in the workers' section. It may provide an opportunity to gather information discreetly." The workers' area proved to be little more than a collection of rough barracks and shanties climbing the hillside below the mine. Disease was rampant. Dysentery, respiratory ailments from the mine dust, infected wounds from accidents. Within hours of setting up a temporary clinic in a vacant shed, Sam and Eleanor were overwhelmed with patients. "These conditions," Eleanor whispered as she bandaged a miner's crushed hand, "it's inhuman." Sam nodded grimly, administering laudanum to a man with a raging fever. "And familiar. Exactly what Blackwood was creating before he was stopped." As darkness fell, they continued, working by lamplight. Word of their presence had spread, bringing more desperate cases: children with hollow eyes and distended bellies, women aged beyond their years, men whose bodies had been broken by relentless labor. One such woman, her face deeply lined though, she couldn't have been much past 40, hesitated at the door of their makeshift clinic. Something in her manner, a certain wariness perhaps, or the way she scanned the room before entering, caught Eleanor's attention. "I can help you," Eleanor offered in Spanish, having learned enough of the language for basic communication. The woman replied in perfect English, startling Eleanor. "Are you really doctors, or are you looking for someone?" Eleanor exchanged glances with Sam, who had moved to join them. "Both," she admitted carefully. "We're providing genuine medical care, but we're also searching for women who were brought here against their will." The woman's expression remained guarded. "American women?" "Yes," Sam confirmed. "Specifically, we have information about a woman named Harriet Collins, who was sent here approximately 3 years ago." A flicker of recognition crossed the woman's face. There was an American woman brought here, not with that name, though. They called her Elena. She lowered her voice. "She worked in the administrator's house until last year." "What happened to her?" Eleanor asked, her heart quickening. "There was an accident, a collapse in the north shaft. Many were killed." The woman made a subtle gesture toward the hillside beyond the town. "There's a cemetery." Eleanor felt hope drain away. Another dead end, another life lost to Blackwood's cruelty. "Thank you for telling us," she said softly. The woman hesitated again, then leaned closer. "But there was another, younger, came later, works in the company store now." She glanced nervously toward the door. "I shouldn't be speaking of this. The bosses don't like questions about their special workers." "Please," Eleanor urged, "we're trying to help. These women were deceived. They brought to the southwest to marry a man who didn't exist, then sold when they arrived." Something in her words seemed to affect the woman deeply. "Like mail-order brides?" she asked, her voice suddenly unsteady. "Exactly like that," Sam confirmed. The woman's composure cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath. "I was one too. Long ago. Not sold, but abandoned when my fiancé found me too plain for his liking." She squared her shoulders with sudden resolution. "The girl's name is Charlotte. Charlotte Weber. She works tomorrow morning. I'll point her out to you." True to her word, the woman, who introduced herself as Josephine Martinez, led them past the company store the following day. Through the dusty window, they glimpsed a slender young woman with pale blonde hair arranging merchandise on shelves. "That's her," Josephine whispered. "She's rarely allowed out without supervision. The store manager watches her closely." Eleanor studied the young woman, trying to match her face to the sparse descriptions in Blackwood's ledger. Charlotte Weber, age 19, from Illinois, transported July 1887. She would be 22 now, if this was indeed the same person. How do we approach her without raising suspicion? Sam wondered aloud. The answer came unexpectedly later that day, when Captain Ortega returned from his official inquiries at the mine administration offices. "I have arranged a dinner," he announced, "with the mine superintendent and his senior staff. They are eager to demonstrate their progressive facility to visitors from the north." His expression suggested what he really thought of their operation. "The company store manager will attend, and I insisted they bring their American clerk to translate as a courtesy." That evening found them in the superintendent's house, a surprisingly luxurious dwelling given its remote location. Crystal glassware sparkled in the lamplight, and liveried servants presented courses of elaborate food that contrasted sharply with the starvation they had witnessed in the workers' quarter. Charlotte Weber stood quietly against the wall, summoned, to translate when needed, but otherwise ignored by the gathering. Eleanor observed her carefully throughout the meal, the downcast eyes, the tense posture, the slight tremor in her hands when addressed directly. When the men retired to the study for brandy and cigars, Eleanor seized her opportunity. "Might I have a tour of the garden?" she requested of their hostess, the superintendent's wife, "and perhaps your American assistant could accompany me. I'd love to learn the Spanish names of your flowering plants." Outside in the fragrant evening air, with the hostess momentarily distracted by a servant, Eleanor finally had a moment alone with Charlotte. "Miss Weber," she said softly. "Charlotte, we know who you are and how you came to be here." The young woman's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. "I don't know what you mean. 3 years ago, you responded to an advertisement from a man named Thomas Reynolds," Eleanor continued gently. "But when you arrived in Arizona, you were met by someone else, a man named Harrington, perhaps." Charlotte's face was drained of color. "How do you—" "Because the same thing happened to me," Eleanor explained quickly, "and to others. Victor Blackwood's operation. We've come to help you leave this place, if you wish to." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. "Leave? It's impossible. They watch me constantly. Mr. Peterson, the store manager, paid a great deal for me. He says I belong to him until I've worked off my debt." "That's slavery," Eleanor stated firmly, "and it's illegal, both in Mexico and the United States." Charlotte glanced anxiously toward the house. "You don't understand. They'll never let me go, and even if I escaped, where would I go? I have no money, no family looking for me." "You would come with us?" Eleanor assured her. "Back to Arizona. We have others there, women who escaped similar situations. They've rebuilt their lives. You can too." For the first time, a flicker of hope appeared in Charlotte's expression. "When?" "Tomorrow night," Eleanor decided. "Can you be ready?" Captain Ortega was less than pleased with their accelerated timeline when they informed him later that evening. "This is reckless," he warned. "We should request official assistance from Hermosillo, which would take weeks to arrive if it comes at all," Sam pointed out. "Meanwhile, word of our interest in Charlotte would certainly reach the mine management." "We can't wait," Eleanor agreed. "Not when she's right there, within reach." Reluctantly, Ortega agreed to help. The plan was simple but risky. Charlotte would slip away during her evening trip to the commissary, meeting them at a predetermined location on the edge of town. They would have horses waiting to make a swift departure under cover of darkness. The following day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eleanor and Sam continued treating patients in the workers' quarter, maintaining their cover while Ortega and his men made discreet preparations for their escape. As sunset approached, tension mounted. "What if she doesn't come?" Eleanor worried as they waited in the shadows of a large oak tree beyond the last buildings of the town. "She'll come," Sam assured her, though his own expression betrayed similar concerns. A twig snapped nearby, causing both to freeze. A small figure emerged from the gathering darkness, Charlotte clutching a bundle of possessions, her face pale but determined. "I got away," she whispered. "But Peterson will notice soon. He always checks on me before he goes to bed." "Then we ride now," Ortega decided, appearing with the horses. "We can reach the canyon before full dark." They had barely mounted when shouts erupted from the direction of the company buildings. Lanterns bobbed as men began to spread out, searching. "They're looking for her already," Sam realized grimly. "Go," Ortega commanded, drawing his revolver. "Take the North Trail. My men and I will lead them south, then circle back to meet you." At the Rio Fuerte crossing, Eleanor hesitated, reluctant to separate. "Captain, this is my country, Senora Morgan," he interrupted with a tight smile. "I know how to disappear in it. Now go, quickly." They rode hard through the night, Charlotte clinging desperately to her mount as they navigated steep trails. In the darkness, by dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Santa Elena, but Sam insisted they push on. "Peterson will have men searching every trail," he explained as they paused briefly to water the horses. "We need to reach the river before they catch up." Charlotte had said little during their flight, her expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. Now, as they rested momentarily, she turned to Eleanor. "Why did you come for me? You don't even know me." Eleanor passed her a canteen. "Because 5 years ago, I was left to die in the desert by the same men who sold you to that mine. Someone saved me, someone who had been watching over women like us, trying to prevent what happened to you." "Dr. Morgan?" Charlotte guessed, glancing toward Sam. "Yes, he became my husband." Eleanor smiled briefly, but more importantly, we both learned that survival isn't enough, not when others are still suffering. They reached the Rio Fuerte crossing by midday, only to find the normally placid river swollen with recent rains. The ford that Ortega had described was now a churning mass of muddy water. "We can't cross here," Sam concluded after surveying the scene. "It's too dangerous." "Then we're trapped," Charlotte whispered. "The mountains on this side funnel everyone to this crossing. They'll find us." Eleanor refused to accept defeat. "There must be another way, a bridge perhaps, or a narrower point." As they debated their options, hoofbeats approached from the south. They quickly retreated into the cover of trees, weapons ready. Eleanor's heart pounded as riders appeared, then nearly collapsed with relief when she recognized Captain Ortega among them. "You made good time," the captain commented, dismounting, "but I see the river presents a problem." "Do you know another crossing?" Sam asked. Ortega nodded. "There's an old Yaqui rope bridge about 3 miles upstream, not suitable for horses, but we could cross on foot." "And the horses?" Eleanor questioned. "We release them," Ortega replied simply. "They'll find their way back to their home stables eventually. Standard practice for bandits in these parts, which is what we now resemble." The indigenous bridge proved to be little more than weathered ropes and wooden slats spanning a narrow gorge where the river churned 20 feet below. Charlotte stared at it in horror. "I can't," she whispered. "I'll fall." Eleanor took her hands. "Look at me, Charlotte. Not at the river, not at the bridge, just at me. We'll cross together, one step at a time." The crossing was harrowing. The ancient bridge swayed with each step, and several slats were missing or rotted. Eleanor maintained a steady stream of reassuring words as they inched across, focusing Charlotte's attention on her face rather than the deadly drop below. When they finally reached the far bank, Charlotte clung to Eleanor, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. The girl who had been held captive for 3 years, who had endured what Eleanor could only imagine, finally allowed herself to break. "You're safe now," Eleanor soothed. "You're free." Captain Ortega and his men accompanied them as far as the border, ensuring their safe passage back into Arizona territory. Before parting ways, the captain provided them with detailed information on other locations from Blackwood's ledger. "I will continue investigating on this side," he promised. "There are 13 more women in that book. Some may still be alive." And we'll keep searching for them, Eleanor vowed, however long it takes. The return to Tucson was triumphant, yet subdued. Charlotte's rescue represented both success and sobering reality. One woman saved, many still missing. Eleanor's heart soared at the reunion with Jonathan, who raced into her arms the moment they arrived home, yet ached for the families who still waited for daughters who might never return. Sarah Jensen welcomed Charlotte with the unique understanding of a woman who had survived similar trauma. "You'll stay with me until you decide what comes next," she offered. "No pressure, no expectations." In the weeks that followed, they established a pattern. Sam maintained the clinic with the help of their assistants, while Eleanor coordinated with Marshall Linden and Rebecca's husband in San Francisco, planning their next rescue attempts. Letters arrived from Captain Ortega with news of 2 more women located in Chihuahua State. Mary Cooper's brother began publishing articles about the bride trafficking ring in his Ohio newspaper, generating both publicity and pressure on authorities to act. 6 months after Charlotte's rescue, Eleanor sat on their porch swing with Jonathan beside her, reading him a story as the desert sunset painted the sky. Sam emerged from his study, holding a telegram. "News?" Eleanor asked, recognizing his expression. Sam nodded. "From Rebecca. Her husband's contacts have located Blackwood's former banking records. They've identified the buyers for at least 4 more women." He sat beside them, showing her the telegram. "They're not in Mexico. They're in California." Jonathan looked up from his book. "Does that mean you're leaving again?" Eleanor and Sam exchanged glances, the unasked question hanging between them. Each rescue mission meant separation from their son, disruption to the clinic, new dangers to face. "Not immediately," Sam answered carefully. "We need to plan first." Later that night, after Jonathan was asleep, they discussed the telegram on the porch, voices low in the cool evening air. "We always knew this might expand beyond Mexico," Eleanor said. "Blackwood's operation was larger than anyone realized." Sam studied her face in the lamplight. "Are you having second thoughts about continuing?" Eleanor considered the question. "Honestly, no, but I am thinking about how to balance this mission with our responsibilities here. Jonathan needs stability. Our patients need care." "Perhaps we need help," Sam suggested. Others committed to the same cause. The idea took root, growing into what would eventually become the Western Women's Protection Society, an organization dedicated to locating and rescuing victims of trafficking throughout the Southwest and beyond. Eleanor and Sam would remain its heart, but as months turned to years, others joined their cause. Lawmen, journalists, former victims, determined to prevent others from suffering similar fates. By 1896, they had located and rescued 9 of the 17 women from Blackwood's ledger. 4 had been confirmed dead. 4 remained missing. Each success strengthened their resolve. Each failure reminded them why they couldn't stop. On the 6th anniversary of their first rescue mission, Eleanor stood beside Sam at a small ceremony in Tucson, where the territorial governor officially recognized their work. Jonathan, now 10 and fiercely proud of his parents, watched from the front row alongside Charlotte Weber, who had become the society's administrator and a surrogate older sister to the boy. "Your work has saved countless lives," the governor proclaimed. "Not just those you've directly rescued, but all who will be spared similar fates because of the awareness you've raised." Afterwards, as they walked home through streets now familiar and beloved, Sam took Eleanor's hand. "Did you ever imagine, when you stepped off that stagecoach, that your life would lead here?" Eleanor smiled, thinking of the frightened mail order bride she had once been. "Never. I came seeking a husband and found a mission instead." She squeezed his hand. "Though I'm rather glad I found the husband too." Sam chuckled. "A fortunate accident of fate." Not an accident, Eleanor corrected, gently. You were watching me from the day I arrived, remember, waiting in the shadows to rescue me. She glanced ahead to where Jonathan ran excitedly, describing the ceremony to a neighbor. And in saving me, you set in motion everything that followed. As twilight descended on Tucson, Eleanor Morgan, once a desperate mail-order bride abandoned, in the desert, walked hand in hand with the man who had rescued her toward the home they had built and the future they continued to shape together, step by step. Behind them lay a path marked by danger, courage, and unwavering purpose. Ahead stretched a journey still unfinished, more women to find, more lives to reclaim. But Eleanor faced it without fear, for she had learned the most powerful lesson of all, that from the darkest beginnings could come the most meaningful lives, and that sometimes a watching eye in the shadows was not a threat, but salvation waiting for its moment. 10 years later, 1900, the new century arrived with a crisp January morning in Tucson. Eleanor Morgan stood at the window of the Western Women's Protection Society headquarters, watching as the organization's newest members filed in for their training session. The modest building on Main Street had once been a dress shop, but now housed an operation that spanned 4 states and 2 countries. At 38, Eleanor's face had gained character lines that spoke of both joy and determination. Her once auburn hair now showed threads of silver, especially at the temples. She wore it pinned back practically, befitting a woman whose life moved between administrative duties and field operations with equal frequency. "They seem eager," Charlotte Weber commented, coming to stand beside her. At 32, Charlotte had evolved from rescued victim to the society's most dedicated leader. Her quiet efficiency kept their expanding network functioning smoothly. "Eager is good," Eleanor replied. "We need their energy for the Johnson case." The Johnson case represented their newest challenge, a ring of traffickers using a variation of Blackwood's old scheme, but on a larger scale. Instead of targeting individual women, they were luring entire groups with promises of teaching positions in frontier schools, only to sell them to mining operations and other enterprises across the Southwest. Sam's reviewing the maps with Marshall. "Lyndon now," Charlotte continued. "The raid is set for Thursday." Eleanor nodded, her mind already calculating logistics. In the decade since they'd rescued Charlotte, their methods had become more sophisticated. What began as desperate rescue attempts had evolved into coordinated operations involving law enforcement across multiple jurisdictions. The door to the meeting room opened, and Sam emerged, deep in conversation with Marshal Lyndon. At 65, Samuel Morgan remained remarkably vigorous, though he had gradually stepped back from field operations. His silver hair and beard gave him a distinguished appearance, but his pale blue eyes retained their intensity when focused on a rescue plan. "Eleanor," he called, beckoning her over, "we've received new information. The Johnson operation is larger than we thought." In the meeting that followed, Eleanor listened intently as Lyndon outlined the latest intelligence. "They have staging areas in 3 locations, one near Flagstaff, another outside Albuquerque, and a third near El Paso. We'll need to coordinate simultaneous raids." "We don't have enough people for that," Charlotte objected. "Actually, we might," Sam interjected. "I've been corresponding with the Denver office. They can handle the Albuquerque location if we provide the intelligence." Eleanor felt a surge of pride. What had begun as their personal mission had blossomed into a network of dedicated individuals across the West. Former victims like Charlotte often became the most effective operatives, their first-hand understanding of the traffickers, methods proving invaluable. "Jonathan arrives tomorrow," she reminded Sam. "He'll want to participate." Sam's expression softened at the mention of their son. At 14, Jonathan Morgan had grown into a thoughtful young man with his adoptive father's compassion and his mother's determination. Currently attending school in San Francisco under the watchful eye of Rebecca and her husband, he returned frequently to assist with the society's work. He can help with logistics, Sam decided, but he's not joining any raids. Eleanor nodded, in agreement. Though they had raised Jonathan to understand and support their mission, they remained protective parents. The dangers they willingly faced themselves were not risks they would expose their son to, at least not yet. That evening, as they walked home through streets now lined with electric lamps, a sign of Tucson's growth over the decade, Sam took Eleanor's hand in a gesture that had become second nature over their 15 years of marriage. "I received a letter from Mary today," he mentioned. Mary Cooper, the first of the rescued brides, had returned to Ohio and established a similar organization focused on preventing young women from being lured west under false pretenses. Good news? Her bill passed the state legislature, Sam reported. All matrimonial advertisements in Ohio newspapers must now carry warnings about potential deception, and agencies must register with the state. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Progress. That single word contained volumes. Acknowledgement of how far they had come from those desperate days following Blackwood's deathbed revelation, yet awareness of how much work remained. Their home expanded over the years to accommodate their growing needs, welcomed them with warmth and familiarity. Though their lives frequently took them away on missions, this place remained their sanctuary, a testament to what they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. As they settled on the porch swing that had witnessed so many of their important conversations, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, recognizing her contemplative mood. "About beginnings," she admitted. "About stepping off that stagecoach, so naive and frightened. About being abandoned in the desert." She turned to face him. "About the man who had been watching me, waiting to intervene." Sam's expression grew distant. "I often wonder what would have happened if I'd approached you sooner, before Harrington and his men took you. Perhaps everything would be different," Eleanor mused. "Perhaps we wouldn't have found our purpose." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Jensen, now the headmistress of Tucson's School for Girls and a frequent dinner guest. At 53, Sarah remained unmarried by choice, having dedicated her life to education and the society's work. "I've brought your prodigal son," she announced with a smile, as Jonathan bounded up the steps behind her, taller than when they'd last seen him just months ago. Dinner that evening was filled with animated conversation. Jonathan shared news of his studies and his growing interest in law, a path that would serve the society well in the future. Sarah reported on her latest educational initiatives, designed to provide young women with skills that would make them less vulnerable to deceptive offers. When Jonathan finally excused himself to unpack, Sarah lingered over her coffee. "I visited the cemetery today," she said quietly. "Left flowers for Abigail." Eleanor nodded in understanding. Abigail Whitman, Jonathan's birth mother, held a special place in their collective memory. Her final gift, entrusting her son to their care, had completed their family in a way Eleanor's barrenness had prevented. 16 years next month, Sam noted, since Eleanor arrived in Copper Springs. 16 years, Sarah repeated. Who could have imagined where we'd all be now? Later that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor slipped out to the garden where desert blooms released their fragrance into the cool air. The stars above shone with familiar brilliance, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate night alone in the desert all those years ago. A figure approached from the house. Jonathan, also sleepless. "Mother," he called softly. "Everything all right?" Eleanor smiled, her heart full at the sound of that word on his lips. Not her child by birth, but hers in every way that mattered. "Just thinking, dear one." He joined her on the stone bench, his youthful energy contained in the thoughtful manner he had developed. "About the Johnson case?" About journeys, she corrected, about how the worst moments of our lives can lead to the most meaningful paths, if we're brave enough to follow them. Jonathan considered this with the seriousness he applied to all philosophical questions. Like how your mail-order bride journey led to all of this? Exactly like that. Eleanor studied his profile, seeing traces of Abigail in the curve of his jaw, but recognizing the influence she and Sam had imprinted on his character. The work we do, it matters, not just for the women we save, but for who we become in the saving. Is that why you keep going? After all these years, he asked. Eleanor thought about the question, wanting to give her son the honest answer he deserved. Partly, but also because once you've experienced being rescued, truly rescued when all hope seems lost, you carry a responsibility to watch for others who need saving. The following morning brought the Society's headquarters to full activity as final preparations for the Johnson operation got underway. Maps covered tables, telegrams arrived hourly with updates from field operatives, and the new recruits received their assignments. Eleanor moved through it all with the quiet authority she had developed, no longer the uncertain mail-order bride, but a woman who had found her calling in the most unexpected of circumstances. As she coordinated team assignments, a messenger arrived with a telegram. She opened it expecting information about the Johnson case, but found instead news that momentarily stole her breath. "What is it?" Sam asked, noting her expression. "Esther Williams," Eleanor replied, naming one of the 4 women who had remained missing from Blackwood's ledger. "She's been found, alive." After 16 years, when hope had faded to a flicker, this final confirmation felt like closing a circle. Of the 17 women in Blackwood's terrible accounting, they now knew the fate of all but 3. 10 rescued and living new lives, 4 confirmed dead. This latest discovery meant only 3 remained unaccounted for. As word spread through the headquarters, a spontaneous celebration erupted. For the newer members, it was simply another success. But for those who had been there from the beginning, Eleanor, Sam, Charlotte, Sarah, it represented something profound, vindication of their belief that no case was ever truly closed, no woman ever truly forgotten. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Eleanor finally allowed herself a moment of quiet tears, not of sorrow but of release. Sam held her silently, understanding as always. "We found her," she whispered finally, "after all this time." "We did," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion, "and we'll keep looking for the others." Eleanor looked up at the man who had watched her from the shadows all those years ago, the man who had become her rescuer, her husband, her partner in a mission neither could have anticipated. In his eyes, she still saw the fierce protectiveness that had driven him to follow Blackwoods. Men into the desert, but tempered now with the wisdom of shared purpose and the depth of a love forged in adversity. "From the day I arrived," she murmured, echoing the phrase that had come to define their unlikely beginning. Sam nodded, completing the thought that had become almost a private benediction between them. "And every day since." In that moment, Eleanor. Morgan understood with perfect clarity that some journeys never truly end. They simply transform, evolving from desperate escapes into chosen paths, from survival into purpose. What had begun with a mail-order bride abandoned in the desert had become a legacy of rescue, redemption, and love that would outlive them both. And somewhere, perhaps, another frightened woman waited for salvation. Another watcher prepared to step from the shadows. Another story waited to begin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.